It's the Black Anglo-Saxon, your favorite neighborhood political scientist, and we back and we about to talk about everything that you just seen on screen. It's a quick one. Hit the like button, hit the share button, subscribe. Today, it is youth in DC. So for those who aren't here, and for those who are commenting, who are not from here, which is why I kind of wanted to touch on this slightly a little bit, because I've been hearing certain perspectives on how the mayor issued an order, and that's the thing that went viral. Another juvenile curfew got put back into place before DC Council comes up and votes on it. But basically, this is the Navy Yard area. I would say a gentrified area, but the whole DC, you could pretty much say, is a gentrified area. And for some people like that, some people don't. But this is also going to be a space that is going to be heavy with presence of federal government buildings. Right there where you see everybody running around that. Across the street is Department of Transportation. Around the corner, you have another DC government building. Down the street, you got Barracks Row. And then you have Department of Motor Vehicles like 2 blocks over. And you have a few other government agencies just laying around in that specific area. You also got a Nationals ballpark stadium, and then you got the United Soccer Field. So just for those who don't necessarily or haven't been to the area or aren't familiar with the space, and I'm bringing that into it because it gives context around the response to it, but also the conversation that's being had around these Navy Yard eruptions. First things first, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing that the children and the youth are having provisions and curfews put in place as a result of the things that are happening without the city, or throughout the city, because we have a high number of carjackings, a high number of, violent crime or crimes that don't necessarily result into quote unquote violence, but things like robbery, theft. And so it's not just a matter of the outbursts, for lack of a better word, that take place in these specified areas, because we also not going to act like DC hasn't had a history of it, because it used to be Gallery Place, and then you had, I wouldn't necessarily say Adams Morgan was popular for it, but different spots throughout the city always had large numbers of youth gatherings. I don't think it is unique to this generation. So I'm not here to say that and disparage and, put this on this generation. I just think it is a cultural thing. And I think based on the moment in time that we're in, the way that people go about doing it has escalated, but it's not something that's isolated to them. Like, we've had a lot of gangs. That's a whole nother, conversation for another day. But we have to start taking accountability and responsibility for a lot of the things that do happen and go on, because I hear a lot of people talking about, well, this is undemocratic, and they pushing back on the quote unquote provisions that have been put in place. And what I would say to people is that, one, especially in this moment and especially in this time when we're facing and dealing with a maniac in the White House, I think it is behoove of us to probably have that in place, because what you don't want is these eruptions to happen and then we have youth being locked up, jailed, and even worse, possibly potentially deleted as a result of a kerfuffle that they're having with some of these MPD officers or National Guard presence, FBI presence, ATF presence, just the myriad, because it's not just one organization that's on boots on the ground now when it comes to the enforcement structure and the enforcement arm that the president has chosen to use. And so we have to take some strategic measure in it. And so I would say don't necessarily view the provisions as a all-encompassing bad thing, but it should force us to have a conversation. I know they've had a number of different events to try to put youth into a space where they are understanding what to do and how to navigate these situations with the more intense police presence. And although that is good, I think that it is a moment to have a conversation that we should not think about events and building and organizing in way of just having sporadic things come up. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't be an event that happens and takes place that actually does this. This has to be kind of like a three-pronged situation because it's cultural. You can't teach that in a 1 month, 2 month period because those things have to be taught and then those things have to be reinforced by the parents. So unfortunately, we do have to have that conversation about, what the actual parents' responsibility and role is in terms of quelling and potentially, mitigating these situations and not having these circumstantial blow ups that might lose us leverage. Because understand that the more and more these things happen, the more and more fuel it gives this administration being Donald Trump, to take advantage of the narrative that's potentially happening and taking place as a result thereof. You may disagree with everything that is done by this specific administration, but also understand that when you have certain narratives that you can weaponize, and when you feed into those narratives and give political advantage or political points or however you want to describe it, you still lose in the end. Because right now, if we continue to allow it to take place and allow it to happen, understand we're dealing with a person who is also at the same time antagonizing certain groups and creating or trying to create certain situations so that he can take advantage of and use certain powers that the executive has in certain situations and in certain dynamics as it relates to civic unrest, quote unquote, right? And I think we have to be very conscious, careful, and aware of that. But we also have to be very honest just about, there is responsibility that the ball has been dropped, when it comes to the elders not taking responsibility in terms of actually rearing the prior generations, in terms of actually creating networks and spaces for the prior generations. Because I hear a lot of people talk about, recreation centers or, things for the kids to do, but the disconnect there in that conversation is that you could have 100 things for the children to do, but if you aren't instilling culturally into that group of kids that these things that you're presenting for them to do as a valuable option and as a valuable opportunity, those 100 things don't really matter or don't really add up. So it's always a more complex conversation, and I think a lot of people like to have when we find ourselves in these situations, but it is not going to happen in a meeting or in 2 meetings or 3 meetings or 4 meetings or 5 meetings. This is a cultural thing. And unfortunately, yes, we do have to shame and talk bad about specific demographics or specific cultural aptitudes, right? Because it's not that we hate the people. It's not that we don't like the people, but the outcomes that are being produced by a particular set of behaviors is what we don't necessarily care for. And when I say we, I'm talking about just everyday people, residents on average, who would agree with me, but who aren't necessarily willing to speak up because in fear of being called a coon or being called, pretentious, etc. And I don't necessarily like the pretentious brigade either. But the truth in the matter of this specific conversation is that, yes, there is a lot of gaps within how people are choosing to parent or not parent their children. Because the truth in the matter is, no child that young should probably be out at the hours that the provision is put in place anyway. Shouldn't be out at 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. or 11 a.m. to 5 a.m. I mean, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Like, that's crazy, right? And so we just got to sometimes be honest about it. And instead of attacking Muriel Bowser on this, there are many things you could disagree with her on, but I don't think this one is the thing that you should disagree with, especially in this moment in time where we got a lot going on. We don't need any spaces where Donald Trump could potentially take advantage of these type of situations and blow it up. And also keep in mind that home rule in DC is still under threat, right? And all of these things just compile and add on to the narrative, to the political rigmarole, right? To the rap sheet of or thereof, to when the presentation is being made that we should not have. And so just keep that in mind as you're going about critiquing the mayor, critiquing this situation. And if you aren't necessarily from DC, I would suggest that you really look into the culture and the mechanics of how DC operates. Because I'm not the type of person that's going to say don't speak on the city that you're not from. But I would say that you should probably kind of really look into it because we are a city, but there is so much overlap in terms of how the federales operate in DC and how the property and the land is distributed and how the laws apply to certain property and land versus others, right? Because where they were at, I don't know if there's DC land, but again, you could be right across the street, and because the Department of Transportation is built the way that it's built, you literally on federal property. Or if you go down 2 blocks, if you running from those police or the National Guard and then you run into DMV or you run onto one of these park spaces that also are owned by federal land, you then find yourself in a kerfuffle. Because even when people talk about smoking marijuana, most most DC enforcement is not going to press that issue. But if you are on federal property, that becomes a whole different conversation and a whole different consequence as it relates to it. So we haven't done a good job, and the older generation hasn't done a good job in terms of preparing the kids and preparing the youth to understand those nuances along with how they navigate. Because again, I'm not here to say, man, look, people been wilding since I was young. And I'm not here to say that DC hasn't gotten better because when I was growing up, DC was a crazy place. This was the aftermath of crack cocaine. So I'm not here to talk about it in that way, but it is an opportunity to have a discussion around the three things that, yes, you people need to figure out better ways to be more engaged in parenting, rearing, and culturally building their youth. It also needs to create a conversation about how the older generation has dropped the ball because a lot of people don't want to have that conversation because again, I mentioned crack cocaine or a lot of the youth, a lot of things have spiraled out as a aftermath for that, and we don't like to have that conversation, but a lot of the things that we're dealing with is a result of that, right? The people want to talk about the gender wars and all of that. That also comes out of that space, because then we go right into mass incarceration. But it opens up, and I really just want y'all to have conversations. You can agree with me, disagree with me, let me know what you think. But more importantly, if you're watching this and you from DC, have conversations without attacking. And again, you can disagree with the man, you could disagree with it and everything, but do it from a logical, logistical standpoint, right? And I think it'll make more sense. I think you may end up on this side of it a little bit more than just, oh my God, that's so awful. Oh my God, she's taking away people's rights. Like, I don't know what to tell y'all, but hit the like button, hit the share button. Let me know what y'all think. Please share it. Still growing slowly, but we getting there. We getting there. And I appreciate all of y'all who do watch the content. I thank you very much and bear with me. I'm trying to grow, get better. Work be taking me away from it a lot. So, because I try to be inside of physical spaces just as much as I am here online talking, and presenting my perspectives and, critiques on the stuff that I see happening and going around. But thank y'all. Enjoy. And as always, catch y'all on the next one.